Welcome to Unlearning Ignorance, a podcast where once a month we discuss a commonly divisive issue and attempt to fairly represent multiple perspectives. We are not experts, nor are we neutral. Our goal is to show an accurate understanding of conflicting sides, in hopes that it will foster civil conversations with an attitude of always learning. But we also want the show to represent you. So every month we will have a response episode where we highlight your comments, emails, tweets, and voicemails, telling us what we got terribly right, incredibly wrong, or something in between. Thanks for listening to this month's episode, where we bring together Vox Populi, the voice of the people. Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, Chase!
Oh, dear goodness. You know that in order to prepare for this episode, I've had to be negative and grinchy, so there's no way that was going to go over well.
Oh, I love it. It is the reason for the season.
Ho,
It's
ho,
the
ho.
happiest of holidays.
The hopiest of holidays.
Merriest of Christmas, Chase, to you.
Thank
And
you.
how... So your research has delved you into a Scrooge McDuck hole?
Yeah. Scrooge McDuck has been my hero for years anyway, but I really got to get into that character. Let that passion flow through me. We, if you haven't caught on today, are obviously discussing Christmas, which is only a controversial topic depending on who you ask, or maybe what era of history you're looking at. But as you've noticed with the past few months of episodes, we've been going a bit more topical, discussing the Star Wars trilogy, the month that The Mandalorian was returning, discussing the Electoral College, the month that we, as a nation, were voting for our next president, and this year discussing celebrating Christmas and different perspectives on why to celebrate it, how to celebrate it, and who should be celebrating it. In doing so, we're going to be looking at two kind of overarching different ideas and practices of Christmas. So, Ethan, you want to introduce us to the first of the two Christmases?
Secular Christmas as the first, as in like American Christmas. The Rudolph Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Frosty the Snowman, and the big man, Santa, who is the jolliest and also has a red nose and a white beard, and brings presents to children all in one night. And the flip side, which is Advent, which Christians celebrate, particularly Catholics call it Advent, so most American Christians know it as Christmas, but for our purposes, we want to kind of distinguish between the two. Advent being focusing on the birth of Christ and the nativity and all the celebrations that encapsulate that.
Right. So we're looking at two kind of starkly different ways to celebrate what's generally considered the same holiday. Christmas on December 25th. It has been a federal holiday for I think 150 years now here in the United States. Even like the company that I work at, we get both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off from work. Yeah. And generally speaking, most Americans do celebrate Christmas. For a very long time, we're looking at over 90% of Americans celebrating Christmas in some fashion. But what you get when you kind of break it down into the two categories we just introduced, which we'll try to be consistent in referring to Christmas as the secular side and Advent as being the religious side, at least just for the sake of clarity within this conversation, is about 1/3 of Americans, according to the most recent Gallup poll that I found, about 1/3 of Americans saying that they celebrate Christmas in an extremely religious way. 1/3 of Americans saying they practice it in a somewhat religious way, and 1/3 saying they practice it in a not very religious way. So it's a pretty even split in a lot of ways, or pretty close to being even, with somewhat religious, that kind of middle ground often being a mixture of secular Christmas and Advent. with, again, less than 10% of Americans falling into the category of not celebrating the holiday.
Yep.
So we're going to be asking 4 questions throughout the conversation, probably focusing more on the third and fourth questions, but the 4 questions being, should non-Christians celebrate Christmas? Should non-Christians celebrate Advent? Should Christians celebrate Christmas? And should Christians celebrate Advent? So to make it just clean and easy across the board for asking all 4 of those questions, Ethan will be taking yeses all the way down, and I will be taking upon myself, willingly, voluntarily, the task of answering no to those questions all the way down.
Chase is going to be Scrooge, and I'm going to be full of Christmas joy and bringing Christmas cheer to all podcast listeners.
As you do on every episode, Ethan.
Across the world.
So you want to just get us started with the first question and presenting the positive case?
Should non-Christians celebrate Christmas? What is Christmas? Well, Christmas is, like I said at the beginning, Santa, reindeer, all that nice and goodness. But that's just the media we consume around this time. What really Christmas is for people who are not Christian, it's the traditions. It's family. It's gathering around the fireplace, opening presents with your family, exchanging gifts with the people you love, and creating traditions or recreating traditions. If you have family that's gone, or you're separated, or you found new family, it's being with the people you love and spreading kindness and love in a very, very cold and dark time during the year, because it is December 25th, and it is for all America, because we are in the northern hemisphere. We are in winter, and generally that's very cold time, very short days, long nights. It generally leads to a sadder, more depressive time. And so having Christmas, a federal excuse to come together and have designated time off to be with people you love, or get away to a vacation spot with people you love. However you want to celebrate Christmas, it's about being with the people who are around you and care about you. And how can that be bad, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, I won't be afraid to say up front that this question probably has my weakest argument. But I'm going to go ahead and take a swing at it and say that no, non-Christians should not celebrate this secular version of the holiday. Or at least there's no real reason to have a celebration on December 25th called Christmas for any reason other than opportunism, that you get a day off work for most jobs. So yeah, you might as well go spend it with the people you love most, whether that's biological family or close friends or whomever else. But as far as celebrating this specific holiday, I would say from this completely secular perspective that it's worth weighing the good versus the bad. As you said, like, there really is something to be said about making an effort to imbue joy and cheer into a season that for the northern hemisphere is just circumstantially, biologically going to be one of the harder, more depressing times of the year. And my writing professor would say in my college course that if you're reading a story that's set in summer, it's going to have a happy ending. If you read something set in winter, it's either going to end in death or divorce. Making an effort to have joy in the season, to have cheer in the season, totally fine. But like, what is also at risk in the more kind of egregiously capitalistic elements of it. Um, what's at risk with this compulsion that you're supposed to buy lots of gifts and spend probably more money than you should or more money than you have to be raising children with an expectation that whatever they want they get, um, or even the elements of the kind of Santa Claus based celebration that has lying kind of built into it. Like we'll get back into this on the Christian side of the conversation as well, but I mean, lying is not something that just Christians think is wrong or that just religious people think is wrong. It's generally morally considered to be a wrong thing. And I think there are a lot of people celebrating Christmas that haven't given proper weight to thinking about how dangerous it is to be like spending years lying to your kids about receiving gifts from this mythical being that you know not to be real, and having your kids have to go through the experience of kind of unlearning that, and kind of coming to that disbelieving at some point in their lives that, oh, this thing that I loved growing up wasn't real. And I think like that's like there are psychological elements to that like aren't good, and at what point are we taking the attempts to have joy in the season too far by truly just fabricating something rather than creating something real that can last beyond just the December season?
Imagination and play and myths have been a like hallmark of good child development and psychological growth throughout the decades. The idea to push kids to be good, that that there is something beyond their parents that is watching over them and seeing if they're naughty or nice, could only compel children to behave better, and raising them with the idea that a there is a magical a
Being.
magical being, a magical aspect of life that brings joy into places where it's impossible, is a good thing because it teaches kid hope. It teaches uh, to hope in the most dire of situations. In that you do not, as long as you have hope, you can keep pushing forward and uh, seeing the good in others, even when it may not be readily apparent.
Well,
So Santa
s- s-
is generally a force for good, fiction or not. We have myths that push good and bad things, teach lessons, and Santa is a good lesson in that you should be good and hope during the dark times of the year.
well, I mean, again, I think weighing the good against the bad, I don't think the good actually wins that battle in this situation, because if you're wanting to impress the desire to behave with kindness and goodness and love into uh, children, into the American culture, or even the worldwide culture. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if that's true, if that's a real thing, then we shouldn't need myths to do so, or specifically um, myths that we try to pass along as facts. My issue is not with the Santa Claus uh, myth per se, but the fact that it's taught to children as fact. That
Hmm.
it's not kids and their parents playing cowboys and aliens in the backyard and then coming inside and your kid going, um, "Are aliens real?" And the parent going, "Oh, absolutely, they live among us. I might even be one." You know, like, and that's kind of what happens with the Santa Claus thing. That it's a lie that actually kind of creates this larger web of lies that you expect other people to also lie to keep the lie
Mm-hmm.
alive. You know that
Mm-hmm.
when you begin teaching your kid that Santa is real, then you expect other parents, other children to essentially lie on your behalf so that you don't get defrauded in this
Mm-hmm.
situation. Um, and so it's a sort of wrongdoing that kind of is perpetually snowballing in on itself.
Right.
Pun not intended.
But it's, I mean, if we're going into the lie aspect, I can justify the lie aspect in that lies will exist in the world and people you trust will lie to you whether or not Santa's real.
Well,
So the Santa myth by your parents, your most trusted like caretakers lying to you and you growing up believing and then the reveal whenever that whatever age that is teaches them that to be skeptical of sources, to question uh, reality, to question what people have told them, even the people they trust the most, to think for themselves. So the Santa myth is a hard, cold lesson of life in that the people you trust can and will lie to you. And
yeah, so I don't
the
think
earlier
that's
they learn that, the better they can accept reality as it is.
sure, but I think parents specifically, should like that's not the type of lesson that a parent should desire uh that their kids learn from them, Like the parents in most traditional senses will be one of, if not the primary source of kind of learning and teaching and life lessons that any child will experience in their life. So to risk all of the other things that parents will try to teach their children upon spending years upholding this lie that the parents know is a lie, um, is really dangerous. Like if you spend years lying to your kid about this and something that they really love and adore comes crashing down, around
Mm-hmm.
age, 6 or 8 or 10 or whenever it is. Um, I think I was 11 before uh, I realized and kind of came to terms with Santa not being real. Um,
That is actually old,
I know,
in my
I know,
perspective. I was like 8.
right? And I fought against it. Like I actually started like kind of doing research to see like how could this be true? Is there any chance that it's true? That was me like studying in the library as an 11-year old, like wanting this
Mm-hmm.
to be true, and it actually being kind of devastating that it wasn't. And like what does that create in a child who, generally speaking, most children will see their parents as kind of perfectly trustworthy sources. And like you're
Mm-hmm.
right that like, no parent is going to be perfect, and a parent will be wrong, or a parent will lie, or a parent will hide things. um
Yep.
and that's basically just going to be true across the board. Like, is Santa the thing that like you want to be the point of, your kids learning that you might not be trustworthy?
Yes.
Because like,
Because
well,
it is such a simple like non inconsequential thing.
no, I think
Like
it's so consequential. Again, like,
okay.
I'm not the only person who has had like a devastating, realization that it's false, that it wasn't real. But if to your point earlier, if the main like if the main benefit of Santa Claus is to, create good behavior and to reward good behavior in kids, like I think
Mm-hmm.
that's dangerous too, because uh it's being good to get what you want. It's being good so that like your desired list of like most, treasured items will be received. And I think it like goodness doesn't have an actual reward system, you know like the rain falls on the wicked and the just, right? There nature doesn't come with um this sort of like measurable karma system of like you getting what you want for being a good person. And so that's not a great lesson to teach your kids. And I think it also inspires the type of outwardly good behavior that lacks integrity, because in reality, it's just being good in front of your parents, being good in front of authority figures. You would almost think like the whole like lyrics of like he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, is
Yep.
probably there to kind of scare kids into always behaving good,
Yep.
but it's
And practicing being good leads to actually good behavior.
eh,
It can. It
maybe.
obviously varies from kid to kid, and parents should decide for their own kids how and what to reveal about Santa. But generally, telling kids to be good is not a bad
Okay. um.
thing.
So
So, Chase,
yeah.
should non Christians celebrate Advent?
So I'm taking no on this again. Um. I think this question might be the shortest one, just because this is the least likely situation. Um. That you don't have too many non-Christians intentionally making an effort to have a strongly religious version of Christmas. I think what's happening here is, as we said earlier, uh, 1/3 of Americans say that their their practice of Christmas is somewhat religious, and even for those who say like the 1/3 that's not very religious or the 1/3 that's strongly religious, it's very hard to truly have just one or the other. To have a version of Christmas where Jesus is never mentioned in any of the songs that you listen to or sing on the radio, or to have a version of Advent that carries over, zero elements
Mm-hmm.
from non-Christian sources, and some of that's up for debate. Like whether or not Christmas trees have their inclusion in the holiday for religious reasons or not. Whether stockings or gift giving should be a part of the Christian side of it. There's again, it's like so it's gonna be some sort of divide for almost everyone.
I would say this is our most grayest of questions
Yeah,
in that celebrating, I would say no Christian, I mean, just according to most Christian traditions, no non Christian can fully celebrate Advent because typically Advent involves the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, and according to Christian tradition, non-Christians should not partake of the Lord's Supper.
yeah.
And so, celebrating Advent to an extent is essentially what
I'm
this comes down to.
so I've been to like a midnight mass at a Catholic church, and there's no one barring the table, so to speak. Most
Mm-hmm.
people are like leaving their aisles, going up, receiving the Eucharist, um, as is like part of kind of the Catholic tradition. And if you look at the numbers, kind of nationwide, you see way more people attending church on Christmas and Easter than any other time of the year. So
Yeah.
ostensibly, like there are non-Christians or um, not really practicing Christians who are partaking in these religious elements of the Christmas holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would answer that no, they shouldn't be, because that isn't giving proper honor to the people who are there and actually mean it. Um, that you know that millions of people across the world, if not potentially billions, celebrate Christmas, believe in Jesus as an actual reality, and not just a nice myth, a nice story. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you know, whilst there might be some like non-believers who are participating in Advent more for family pressure or just kind of societal expectations that have been put upon them, I think there are also those who partake in the Jesus-y side of it because they like the story. You don't have to um, believe in the Jesus' birth as being historically accurate, or to believe that Jesus is of any deity or any like
Incarnation
yeah,
of God.
in order to look at the story as being um beautiful or interesting or kind of worth uh remembering once a year and singing about once a year. And like that is not what's happening in the people that they would be celebrating around. Like that is not why, generally speaking, most people are at those like church gatherings. And so I think uh, if you're knowingly participating in these things, not believing in the religious actuality of it, then that is, like I said previously, dishonoring to those around you who are there because they actually believe in it as an eternal and historical reality.
Hmm. Well, I mean, the first half of my pushback would be coming from essentially where my first argument was, in that this is a myth that teaches good lessons. It is a good to remember that, or a good story to think that the creator of the universe would come down as a baby and be born in the most humblest of settings.
You just said
And
most humblest.
it is the mostest of
It's a
humblest.
double imperativist.
To be born in a humble stable, and it is a nice feel good story that can inspire and encourage hope, humility, positive qualities among people. But I've already kind of made that argument in that the first part, so I'll go to the second half, which is from a Christian perspective. What better way to impart the gospel but around Christmas time? Uh, to have the people who do not believe
Mm-hmm.
come into your church and hear about your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and how he came as a baby to be born of a virgin in a humble stable, later to die and rise again on the third day. And that's the gospel truth. And why would you want to deny them at the door when it's an opportunity to share the gospel? Jesus said, "Go and tell."
Right.
And using Advent, which in our happenstance and culturally in America, it is celebrated by both Christians and non Christians. That's amazing. Come in and celebrate and hear about my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and repent and believe, and you shall be saved.
Yeah. So my pushback to that, which I appreciate you bringing that up because that is a great argument to this question. Um, so from a specifically Christian perspective, looking at the kind of evangelistic opportunity of um, non-believers, not only being willing to hear about Jesus, but even like personally saying like I'm gonna show up, like I'm gonna go to church this one day out of the year. Um, like opportunity wise, that seems incredible. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my my I guess dissent against that would be twofold. Um, one, if you look at like the Christian Great Commission, it's to go and spread the gospel. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a laziness to wanting conversions to happen inside your church by non-believers coming to church. That I think there's a boldness and a fervency that gets removed from the general layman, the general kind of day-to-day Christians, to actually being the ones to go and share this uh, religious belief that they think all people should believe, um, and instead just letting people kind of come and receive it rather than them going and sharing it. Uh, and a lot can be lost if they're just depending on non Christians showing up to their church on Christmas and Easter, which, as another element of that, also kind of damages the sanctity of what church is supposed to be as a gathering of believers,
Mm.
and hurts the ability, kind of just generally speaking, for the church to be focused on the growth of believers rather than, getting lost in this focus on, churches being about the conversion of new believers and not adequately feeding the people who come there every week in their growth. So the second side of that is the practicality of what these services tend to look like, and
Ah.
what are you, um, if you get the interest of a non-believer through like a Christmas Eve or Christmas service, or if you quote unquote save them, through this Christmas service, like
Mhm.
what are you saving them into? What are you attracting them to? Um, because most churches are doing something extra special, whether it's like the biggest musical performance of the year, or some sort of like nativity play, or like special kind of videos or treats or activities, or food trucks, or like hot chocolate, or whatever it is. Uh, like there's this attractional element to how a lot of churches treat Christmas, because
Mhm.
they're expecting visitors, because they're expecting people who don't normally come. They make this extra big deal about it. And I think like you might lose the people you gain, if you make this extra special service like, oh man, I love this. This is cool. This isn't what I was expecting from church, or this isn't what I thought Christianity was. And they come back the next Sunday and it's just back to usual. You might be running into the situation of, oh, weird. I guess that was just a special thing for Christmas. So I'll just come back next Christmas. I don't like the way things are usually. This is dry or bland or boring or not as special or not as cool. Um,
So you're kind of going up on the a little bit what you touched on at the beginning, which is the commercialization. You're worried about the commercialization aspect of Advent,
oh, and
of
that's a great
the
point.
dressing up of it.
Yeah, like there's definitely dangers in the kind of commercialization and opportunistic capitalism on both the secular Christmas side and the religious Advent side, for sure.
My pushback would be the gospel can speak through any mortal trappings or distractions that man wants to put up during an Advent
Yeah,
service. That if you preach the gospel, those who will hear it, their hearts will be changed, and those who do not, who hear it and reject it, they reject it on their own grounds. Man, it is so hard not to get into theological.
yeah, and
I didn't think it was going this way, but
yeah, but you also say that from the assumption that Christianity is true. So if I can argue from the assumption that Christianity is false, church and preaching and these Sunday services should still have some sort of practical benefit to the people who partake in it. You know, that
mhm.
it hopefully is not just some big marketing ploy for the people who work at churches to get money out of people's pockets, right? Like if there's if there's any if there's any decency to Christianity in a world where it's false, um, then like people show up every week because they're actually getting something good out of it. And so even
Mhm.
in that situation, like the way that a church functions and the things that get preached from the pulpit and just the general activities should be based primarily around the benefit and personal growth of the regular attendees, and not the attracting of brand new members and visitors. Like you're kind of cutting yourself off at the heels if your focus is primarily on new people and not
Mhm.
on the health and benefit of your regular members.
So operating from the presumption that Christianity is false in a very secular world where a lot of our lives have become disconnected, and we drive our car to work and back, we see our family, we've lost a lot of our gathering places. I mean, particularly within COVID, in that gatherings are very much discouraged. Having a church that is a place to promote gathering of strangers, of people who want to seek meaning beyond this existence, is a good thing. It's a gathering of people, of it's a societal good for people to gather and meet their neighbors who are like-minded or would like to be uh, like-minded and are seeking answers and can seek answers together and have that communal aspect to again combat some of the darkest times of the year.
I mean, that's essentially why Unitarian Universalist churches exist. It's taking the form and structure of what's been so successful for Christianity and just filling it with people of a different um, mindset, of different religious perspectives, different philosophical perspectives. And yeah, it's I've heard plenty of non-Christians look fondly upon church community because really once you get out of like school and college, you run out of most of your organic ways to meet new people, to gain deep relationships. And just like statistically speaking, a lot of people don't gain very deep new friendships once you get into like your
In
30s,
adulthood.
40s, once you have
Yeah.
kids. So like right, like there's that benefit to it. But again, like you aren't making deep, real, lasting community if it's just about getting new people in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so move on to our third question. Should Christians, believing Christians, celebrate secular Christmas?
Absolutely. So clearly, Christmas brings a certain amount of joy to both Christians and secular Christians. And to be seen as the bah humbug, the Scrooges, is not fun. But that is not enough reason to tell people to celebrate Christians, because Christians can be seen as squashing a lot of the fun of other secular beliefs. Gay marriage is one that comes to mind. But Christmas, it kind of touches on a little bit of the initial point, is in that you can celebrate aspects of your culture. Just because we celebrate 4th of July doesn't mean we are glorifying the United States. Just because we celebrate secular Christmas does not mean we are elevating Christmas above the birth of Jesus Christ. You can have those fun aspects of lights and Christmas trees and presents, and you can even graft in a little of the double meaning from Advent into secular Christmas, in that, hey, presents are similar to the Magi bringing presents, or similar to the birth of Jesus being the ultimate gift to humanity. And so Christians should celebrate Christmas because we are in the culture of America, and we can celebrate aspects without bringing them above the gospel and the religious advent.
Okay, so I need to preface my answer real quick with a distinction, because in our fourth and final question of the episode, I'm going to be arguing that, should Christians celebrate Advent? No. I'll be answering that in a second. But for this question, should Christians celebrate secular Christmas, I'm going to be answering it from the assumption that Christians celebrate Advent, which, according to the Gallup poll I mentioned earlier, 0% of Catholics don't celebrate Christmas, and only 2% of Protestants don't celebrate Christmas. So assuming that all American Christians celebrate Christmas is a pretty safe thing to do. Coming from that perspective, in celebrating Christmas, I do think you are diminishing the thing that you're supposed to actually be celebrating. And the reason why Christians should not celebrate secular Christmas is because there's no way to get that emphasis back. There's no way to get that time back. There's no way to get that influence that you are placing upon like your kids and your family back when you spend that holiday kind of splitting sides between, okay, like now we're reading Luke 2, now we're watching Frosty the Snowman. Now we are, enacting the nativity, but now we are fulfilling whatever kind of consumeristic wishes you have for, the newest video game, the newest Hot Wheels set, whatever it is. And the big one here, which I said I would come back to it, it is Santa. That I said earlier that in general, parents shouldn't lie to your kids, but under Christianity, there's no excuse to be lying to your kids. And the Santa lie in particular is not just a wrong thing to be doing, but it is establishing an anti-gospel, a deity-like figure, a supernatural being of Santa Claus, whose lesson is actually the opposite of what Jesus' lesson is. So you are teaching, on one hand, there is this figure named Jesus who came to die for your sins so that you would get better than what you deserve. So that instead of the punishment you deserve, you would receive grace and mercy instead. And then you have this other supernatural being whose story you get taught that you learn to love as a kid. That's the exact opposite. That is, you get exactly what you deserve. You get coal if you're a bad kid, and you get gifts if you're a nice kid. And what this also does for the Christian family who is trying to split the difference between secular Christmas and Advent in this way is, like, you have these kids who are presumably learning about Jesus primarily from their parents and learning about Santa primarily from their parents. And when you're doing this half and half Christmas thing, teaching your kids both of these as true realities, and dangerously making Santa the more tangible reality because you're getting an actual gift from him. You're actually seeing him, eat cookies off your table. You're seeing him leave you gifts, in your living room under your tree. Making it almost this more believable, it's like, oh, there's proof. Oh, it's real. And it's very exciting, and it's meeting your most, immediate desires as a little kid. That to grow up and learn that Santa was just a farce, just a lie, you're kind of having your first atheist experience at that point. You're saying, my parents taught me about this supernatural being and told me this wonderful story about who he is and what he does, and then I found out that he wasn't true. I got older, I wised up, and it was wrong. So you're like, as parents trying to teach your kids both Jesus and Santa, you are setting a precedent for your child to then later grow up and be like, you know what, my parents told me about this supernatural being named Jesus, told me about his story and who he is and what he does, but I got older, I wised up, found out he wasn't real, and I don't believe anymore. So I think that really positions like, both in terms of strategy and just plain integrity and morality, the necessity for Christian parents who actually believe what they're teaching their kids about Jesus to do so without providing false competition in such a dangerous manner.
As long as Santa is taught in the proper context of he is inferior to Jesus, because if the conversation is coming up about Santa and their belief in Santa, he should be and is taught in the context of him being inferior. We're not even getting to whether he's real or not, but still that even this mythical being that you've been taught about is inferior to God and Jesus and the love and the story of that this is better, that it elevates him in children's minds. It elevates the Christmas story. It elevates Jesus beyond the Santa. And so even when Santa's taken out, they can see, oh, even though Santa's not real, I still have Jesus. I can still
I don't
claim.
I don't see that working out in reality. I don't see that being a true thing. And like, yes, you can use the Santa story to point toward Jesus being so much better,
Mhm.
but I think that still needs to be done, if at all, in the context of Santa being fiction. Um, that like you are superior to Santa in the fact that you're a real person and he's not, right?
And celebrating Santa as being fiction does not neglect people celebrating Christmas. Like you can both teach your kids about Santa and that there was a real Saint Nick, and celebrate and tell them about the things he did and how he helped these poor children and how he got mythologized and turned into
Yeah.
Santa
Well,
Claus.
or like
Like
the
you can teach all that to kids and still be celebrating secular Christmas. Like kids don't have to believe in Santa to celebrate secular
right.
Christmas.
So I mean, I did weigh heavily into that, um, the Santa's part specifically. I think that's probably the most pressing part of this side of the argument. Um, do I have a like super strong case for saying that practicing believing Christians shouldn't be allowed to watch Muppets Christmas Carol, or to sing Winter Wonderland? Um, Not exactly. But I do think a distinction could at least be helpful, right? Like if um like what I was suggesting earlier for non-Christians celebrating secular Christmas, if it became kind of this less distinctly December 25th thing and just became more of this winter season, and because really, like, we do treat it as a season. December
Happy
25th. December
holidays.
25th is the day that we get off from work, but
Hmm.
all December long, even kind of like trailing off into January and New Year's Day, um,
Hmm.
and with the fact that kind of other holidays, your Kwanzaa, solstice, Hanukkah, kind of get wrapped up together in a few of these wintry ways, um,
Hmm.
to celebrate a more or a less distinct kind of broad seasonal winter type celebration, I think would be better, so that for these Christians, Advent can remain as untainted and Jesus centric as possible, while enjoying your sleighing and your tree decorating, and whatever else it is that you want to do in your culture, your family, your personal choices of traditions.
I think it can come down to uh, it feels like right in the fence on this, but the Bible clearly has a principle in that if a celebration or anything outside of biblical context violates your conscience, you should not be celebrating that. But if it doesn't, you are should feel this idea of Christian liberty to celebrate it. And if it violates your, if you feel like Christmas violates your Christian conscience, you should then therefore not impose that onto other Christians and judge them for celebrating Christmas. I think that's where we can agree on the secular Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that exact point is something we should bring back for the end of the episode for our
Mm-hmm.
"How Can We Be Friends" segment. Um,
Absolutely.
is there anything else you want to add here before we move on to our final question?
Hmm. Santa's real. That's
Okay,
it.
okay, you're gonna be a great dad. Um, so final question: should Christians celebrate Advent? This
Advent.
might be my most controversial no. Maybe.
Oh
And I
yes.
think all of these no's have been pretty controversial. I'm prepared to take flack for this episode. But Ethan,
we
tell
should we
me.
should clarify that because we've had feedback. We might want to put this at the beginning of the episode, but that we do not necessarily hold these opinions we are stating.
Yeah,
These are opinions that we are taking on in order to represent a conversation.
right. We try to fairly and correctly, accurately represent broad strokes of the opinions of other people.
Mhm.
And, we hope to hide, what our specific thoughts can be in an effort to be amicable with one another and amicable towards the people that we are either agreeing or disagreeing with
Mhm.
in the arguments that we represent on this podcast. So that should cover me for everything I'm about to say. But let's hear from you first. Should Christians celebrate Advent?
No, 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 no. I started the last one. You get to start
Oh,
this one.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm saying no here. Um, and there's actually a lot of things to back up here. But quick preface here would be that I can really only speak to this from a Protestant perspective. Not because I haven't researched the Catholic side, but that I just cannot see any reason why Catholic Christians shouldn't celebrate Advent. I don't think there's an argument for it because of the way that that religion is constructed.
Oh yeah.
That tradition is its own pillar of belief and of practice. So because the tradition exists and because it exists so strongly, and because of just the general importance of the church calendar to the Catholic religion, um,
Mhm.
there's really just no getting around it,
Yeah.
and it
Short
fits.
short of entirely undermining the Catholic faith, like you can't argue for not
Right,
celebrating
right.
Advent.
You can argue against Catholicism, but within Catholicism, you can't really argue against Advent.
Exactly.
And in their general practice, as opposed to most Protestants, aside from maybe like Lutherans and Anglicans, the Protestants who most similarly to Catholicism also practice kind of a liturgical calendar.
Mhm.
Christmas just kind of fits right into the year way more consistently and is less of this big showcasey different thing than in Protestantism. Like Christmas is way different than the rest of the year, I think, in a way that might be less true
Mhm.
for Catholics. And so presumably I'm arguing right now from the 2% of Protestants who don't celebrate Christmas at all, or perhaps the 13% of Protestants who don't celebrate it particularly religiously. Um, and really, one of the strongest arguments here is historically, a lot of Protestants didn't celebrate. When the Protestant Reformation split from the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
around 500 years ago, a lot of your denominations, a lot of your pilgrims and Puritans weren't celebrating Christmas and saw it as a particularly um, Catholic practice that didn't have any foundation in Scripture. And going from a Bible based argument, you can argue against Christmas in a way that you can't from a tradition based argument within Catholicism. Is when you look in the Bible itself, what you see is the nothing in the New Testament that says or even suggests that uh, Christmas or Jesus' birth or Jesus' birthday is something to celebrate every year. Um, and you don't even see Jesus' birth or that like specific scene, that moment in time being attributed with a particular amount of importance. The entire story is only presented in one out of the four gospels, and even that it's quite short. I think 16-ish verses are actually given to the actual day of Jesus' birth. And even like the information that's there is different than the kind of whole nativity story that generally gets celebrated. Like we have kind of culturally furnished out the story or kind of lumped things together. So the
The
idea,
Magi.
yeah, like the idea of three wise men appearing at Jesus' birthday, that there's no reason to think there was three of them. They the actual term is magicians, not wise men.
Mhm.
They probably appeared months down the road. Um,
I thought it was more. I thought it was more like a year.
I'm
Or
not sure exactly, but
yeah,
um,
he was definitely older.
so for you have all these things that are like, okay, like if the incarnation is very important for Christians, why
Hmm.
is that specific moment of Jesus's birth so important? Um, the incarnation uh
Well, the
goes from
birth of a virgin is it. I'll push back a little bit real quick. Birth of a virgin is very important to fulfill the prophecy
sure, but
of Old
again,
Testament.
like there's nothing like in scripture that says like celebrate his birth. You know, like celebrating the incarnation, you can make a stronger argument for, but that doesn't start at his birth. You know, that goes back to the conception uh, of a pregnant woman giving birth is not a miracle. A virgin becoming pregnant is the miracle, right?
Yes.
Um, so so that incarnation goes from the moment of conception to Jesus' death on the cross, and that as a whole isn't something that needs to be given special focus once a year because it should be given special focus every Sunday, right? Every Lord's Day, every church gathering should focus on the life, death, resurrection, and gospel of Jesus in a way that makes it really weird, I think, to give it special focus on one day of the year, one holiday of the year, when like that suggests that like we could be focusing on it more the rest of the year. Like to say that like we aren't maxing out on our gospel presentation every Sunday says like we're not really hitting what we should be hitting on a Sunday to Sunday basis, and so for some reason we have to go overboard once a year instead. Which is kind of the same argument you can make against celebrating Easter, which again would be a kind of a specifically Protestant argument to make, to say that Easter is kind of a holdover from the Catholic calendar. And like what you have here is like this historical precedent in Protestant churches to not celebrate this holiday and to see it as something that's distracting or encourages gluttony, encourages greediness in kids, doesn't actually produce the type of Jesus-centric goodwill and good behavior and good spirits that are supposedly created by the holiday, and that no Christians would need a special Christmas holiday if the weekly holiday, if the weekly holy day, so to speak, of the Sabbath were properly giving weight to the eternal pre-existence and conception and birth and life and ministry and death and resurrection and reign of Jesus.
Christians should celebrate Advent because they should celebrate the incarnation of Jesus Christ. However, they should be doing that throughout the year. But that does not negate the fact that we can do that at particular times. In fact, it is almost a unifying thing to do it at particular times, in that we as Protestants have lost a little bit of the universality of the Christian faith, the little c Catholic Church, in that the Christian faith has become splintered by
Protestantism.
by non-Catholic belief. That's bad. Protestantism has become very splintered, and having universal holidays in that times we celebrate the death and resurrection on Easter, the birth at Christmas.
Ascension is probably the third biggest one.
It cannot be bad to celebrate it with other Christians at the same time. To have this knowing of like maybe you're out of town visiting family and can't visit your church. To go to a local church and then be celebrating the same thing as your church back at home could not be more unifying as a faith where we have divided among the silliest of things to set aside physical to have cultural time where we are saying, all right, we're going to celebrate the life, the birth of Christ at Advent. We're going to celebrate the death of Christ at Easter. and that can be cross cross denomination unification that is nothing but good. That is good.
I disagree.
And
Kind of. I don't disagree that the unifying element is bad. I think that there's nothing more unifying than what I argued of just preaching the gospel every Sunday.
mhm.
That's a year long, week to week unity. That takes away the need to manufacture unity through a strict liturgical calendar.
Nobody's advocating for a strict liturgical calendar.
Well, I mean,
Advent is not celebrated strictly liturgically by most Protestants, but the season and trappings of some Advent are pretty universally shared among Protestantism. And so it's these connections to Catholicism that do not necessarily distract, but rather point back towards Christ, that point back towards the gospel.
so if the incarnation is as important as Christmas suggests it is,
Mm-hmm.
um, would Christmas actually satisfy the proper amount of weight that miraculous historical reality is supposed to be given within the Christian faith?
Would it satisfy?
Yeah. Like if it's as big of a deal as Christmas suggests, then is the one day a year actually good enough?
Yes. It is not well because one Advent is not one day; it is a season.
Well, I mean, okay, mm, I wouldn't split it too far. Like Advent is generally a season, but we've also been using Advent to specifically refer to the Christian version of December 25th.
Yes, well, but it's not just the Christian version of it. It is both that and it's. I mean, leading up to it, there are generally even outside Catholic, there are people who practice like things that build up to the Christmas Eve service.
Right. Often you have like a sermon series throughout the month of December, or you have the 12 days of Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
or you have like December Eve
Yeah,
traditions and services. Um, it's
it,
yes for
it,
most people it's at the very least a 2 day thing. For many a 3 to 4 week thing.
yeah, and so I would say that is satisfactory for the importance, dedicating an entire service or two services to that particular moment in the Bible. Uh, Satisfies, but also it is not excluded from being brought up in other contexts throughout the year. It is just particularly, hey, we promise this year we're going to reflect on it. That does not speak to what we are teaching before or after. The focus can come back to it. It is just we have always done it on a particular time, and to remember to do it on the particular time does not obfuscate us from talking about it throughout the year.
So, would you not find it hecka weird to sing "Hark the Herald Angels Sing" in June?
Oh yeah, no, that's sacrilegious.
Right. So
I say that
I
kiddingly.
like that there actually is though this really weird like cage of this kind of from the day after from Black Friday to Christmas, this place where
Mm-hmm.
Christmas songs and Christmas sermons and Christmas traditions are supposed to exist. Uh, and so that only makes sense in terms of this tradition, right? But if we're talking from a Christian perspective of this supposed to be reality, then it should be normal for Christians both to not sing Christmas songs or preach Luke 2 sermons in December, as well as to sing Christmas songs and preach Luke 2 sermons in May, October. Right? Like Joy to the World is a song that should be sung any Sunday of the year, and yet it gets relegated to this specific season because it gets lumped in as a Christmas song. Um, but if we're talking about these like important eternal truths that
Mm-hmm.
like you purport to be the case here,
Mm-hmm.
then it's more of a disservice to the truths rather than an elevation of the truths to limit them to the season as they culturally get done, which I think is spoken to by the awkwardness of singing Christmas songs out of season. By the fact that people kind of like get so inundated with them in December that they don't want to hear them outside of the Christmas season. The fact that like I think most like
I think I would push back a little bit in that I will concede the song aspect because I mean music has a very emotional component, but that I would not see a Luke 2 sermon as being out of place outside of Advent time. That would not be. I would say that's not. Nobody would find that odd to be having a Luke 2 sermon in the middle of June, Christmas in July, like sermon, but that the songs have a cultural like relevance for a specific time, and that music is a very emotional aspect.
well, so that kind of gets to it though, like what you just said, the cultural significance. Like
Mhm.
it really is a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing that has been passing for about 150 years, like post Charles Dickens,
Mhm.
as a religious thing that it has become so largely practiced that this thing that used to be practiced by, you know, if you go back far enough, into the early days of Christianity, we're pretty sure either no one practiced it or very few people practiced it. If you
Hmm.
get further
There.
into, I don't know, so like there's like one historian who refers to like Christmas like practices in like 127 ish AD, which is still like pretty far into, that's a century into Christianity. Um, and that's not too far, big picture wise, but we are like as a nation only 150 years into like Christmas being a legitimate holiday, and really it
Mhm.
was for most non-Catholics the influence of Charles Dickens and kind of that kind of British culture that made this mixture of uh, the Jesus ideas and the kind of cultural celebrations become this mainstream thing again, to the point
Right.
where it's now normal for all Christians to celebrate.
So here's where I'm gonna put a bow on my argument. Christians should not
Like a Christmas
concede.
present.
Yeah, that was not intentional. Uh, Christians should not concede the ground that we have in culture to secular Christmas because Christians giving up Advent is conceding and giving away this ability for us to uh, one, attract non Christians into the church, but two, to culturally celebrate Christ in a way where we can present the gospel to both non Christians and Christians and have a set time where people know to expect the gospel is not something we should give up to capitalism, corporatism, uh, secular Christmas, Santa. If we give up on Jesus around Advent, we
Whoa.
are
Okay.
conceding it
Okay.
to Santa. And so it
War on
I
Christmas.
don't think
Bill
we should
O'Reilly.
lose this cultural ground that we have. I think it's a worthy time to celebrate Jesus, even though it is expected of the culture. Like if we stop celebrating Advent, we are saying, all right, culture, you win.
All right. I will, I guess, put a bow on my argument as concisely as I can, which we all know concise is not one of my strong suits. Um, to say that Uh, I recognize this is never going to happen. I recognize that Christmas is here to stay for the you know foreseeable future, and that the 2% of Protestants that don't celebrate it are not going to win this argument. Um, but uh, I do think that Christians, specifically Protestant Christians, should give up Christmas celebrations and should give up on the Advent season, not in order to forfeit ground, but in order to make a statement about the steadfastness and the universality and the non circumstantial, not seasonal reality of how they're supposed to live in light of Jesus' gospel. That being extra giving and extra celebratory and extra loving and extra kind. Should not be a Christmas season thing. Should not be a winter thing. Should be a all year round until I die thing. And that Christians having meals together and giving each other gifts and singing songs, in the streets and meeting more frequently than usual should not be a Christmas season thing. That should be a lifestyle thing in light of this religion that they have been saved into. That is my bow. My gift to you, our listener.
I will accept
my
it
best,
and
my best argument.
and parrot what I said before we pivoted to this question, which is it comes down to conscience. If it violates your conscience, do not celebrate. I in fact encourage both Christians, non-Christians, if celebrating Christmas, Advent, whatever violates your conscience, it is a sin. It is not good for you as a non-Christian. Like, you should not do it out of obligation, but because you do it out of feeling the joy of loving the Lord and celebrating Christ, or loving the people around you, depending on which Advent or Christmas we're talking about.
Yeah. And in this exact same way, you should allow the freedom of conscience of the other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably my biggest pet peeve in this whole discussion of who should celebrate Christmas and how and why, is wanting to force your specific celebrations, your specific traditions, your conscience on the matter onto other people. So, like, if you go to church, if you as a Christian go to church with someone who doesn't celebrate or doesn't want to celebrate, let that be. Like, don't like pick your battles wisely and don't try to force this man-made holiday onto someone who doesn't want to celebrate it. And similarly, like, whether you're talking about a secular version or a religious version, like, parents, I think you should really consider not forcing this onto your kid. Like, to the extent that you want your family to celebrate Christmas, and whatever that looks like for the traditions and beliefs of your household, like, let your kids celebrate to the extent that they want to and enjoy. But, like, you're only going to make your kid hate Christmas more if they don't want to, and you force them to practice it anyway. If you if you want them to believe in Jesus and are forcing them to begrudgingly do all these Jesus-y things, that's not going to help. So I think in wrapping up, as always, with how can we be friends, have peace and have appreciation and have respect for how the people in your life want to celebrate Christmas, regardless of how Jesus-y or non-Jesus-y it is, regardless of whether they put up a tree or put up lights or make their own traditions. So that would be...
Yeah. And there's an aspect also in that just because you are allowing other people to celebrate things, I don't think that should mean you should be suppressing your thoughts on it. But there's a principle in Christianity that I also think secular and non-Christians can adhere to, which is speak truth in love. Speak what you believe is true, but in a loving manner.
Yeah.
And so,
right, not protests about red cups and
yes, yeah, forming boycotts against seemingly
Sears
people
and
attacking.
Walmart and yeah.
Anyways, speak your truth in love to the people around you, and don't judge them, and don't allow yourself to be judged for how you want to celebrate. So, Chase, it was fun teasing the Scrooge out of you.
Yep, real fun. Happy holidays.
Oh, Merry Christmas.
Cool.
But seriously, our listeners, we've been enjoying making this podcast. We launched this year, and it's been a very interesting year, and we've really appreciated. We've gotten feedback, and we've appreciated it. We hope to make some response episodes here soon, and a genuine thank you to everybody who listens.
Thank you indeed, and however you celebrate your December, hope it's a good one. Thank you for listening to this month's episode, but the conversation isn't over yet. We want to hear from you. What did we get right or wrong, and what's your perspective on the issue? By writing in, your feedback can be featured in the response episode we will publish later this month. Email us at unlearningignorance@gmail.com, tweet us at unignorancepod, or leave a voicemail at 972-885-9574. Again, that's 972-885-9574. And by lending your voice to the conversation, you can help this podcast represent the Vox Populi, the voice of the people. Thanks for tuning in to Unlearning Ignorance, and we'll be back next month with another divisively divisive issue.